afternoon. Just testing that you can all hear us. Yes, good. As the introduction, I'm Laverne, Antrobus, educational psychologist, and particularly pleased to be here to have this opportunity to, I think, press the pause button a little bit for us to all think about your children and what it is that you think they're going to need in order that they can grow into confident and healthy adults. Should we say no? Did you want to? Okay, so go for it. So you've heard the sort of outline of our talk, which is all about how you can help provide the help that they need and the support that they need. And I suppose when we were thinking about what we wanted to really be bringing to this part of the afternoon was something that's in the media anyway. You'll all be waking up most mornings and hearing that we don't have very healthy children, that we've got children that we need to worry about. And as a parent, as parents ourselves, of course that's something that we get very, very interested in and probably quite worried about. I think one of the things that is particularly interesting to me about hearing about all the difficulty is that it sometimes doesn't leave room for those young people that actually are doing quite well and are managing an ordinary degree of good mental health. I think we hear a lot about mental health, but actually I think we don't hear about ill health, so ill mental health, as opposed to good mental health. And mental health for us is about being confident, being able to cope with the ups and downs that life presents to us. We will all be trying very hard as adults to make sure that we stay well, and we notice the moments when we don't feel so good about ourselves and we might pay some attention to it. We really need to be paying attention to what our children are saying to us and what we observe in them in terms of their behaviour. So are they sleeping well? Are they eating regularly and in a good enough way? Do they feel creative? Do they feel like they're communicating that they can keep themselves safe? And are they feeling that they are accepted by the communities that they are in, particularly at school, which is the largest community they'll find themselves in? And have they got some capacity to have some empathy or some concern for others? So are they talking to you about what's happening amongst themselves and their peers? One of the things that is quite central to how we bring up our children is how we think about the relationships that they have with us. A lot of you will have heard about attachment theory, so the way in which our children are alongside us and the way in which they feel our presence, which is so important. I suppose we're saying things that we hope you all are thinking and knowing about, but as I say, it's an opportunity for you to really pause and think about it, because we can say all of these things and have absolutely none of them in our relationships. So a lot of the children that we see in therapy or when something needs a little bit of thinking about, one of the reassurances they need is to know that their parents can hold them in mind, can actually think about them when they're not with them. I find that sometimes, when I'm going to schools to do school observations, and some of this has applied to me in the past, young people are being dropped off at school and parents are on to the next thing before they've even got them through the school door. So you're taking that call for work, you're checking your emails, and actually what children communicate to us, not in a direct way, they don't say, Mommy or Daddy was doing this, is that actually they don't feel that their parent was with them at the point of that transition. So they don't feel something of the level of attachment that they really need to feel, that actually they are going to be in your mind for the rest of that day. They absolutely are going to be with you and you're going to be thinking about them whilst you're doing the millions of tasks that you're going to be doing. So John Bowlby was very keen on making sure that we as parents think about ourselves as the key attachment figures for our children. We're the people they turn to, the people they rely on, the people they need the most support from. And the intricate, sort of rather delicate dance that we do with them is an important one that we need to pay some attention to. And it's a model and a template for the sort of relationships that they're going to have from there on in. We're developing those relationships inside the house, and it's what we want to see outside. A lot of our work is often with schools, as you can probably imagine. And given that schools are the place that you are handing your young children over to for a very large part of their day, it's really important that you feel confident about the sorts of relationships they're going to be having with those very significant people there. Those of you in the audience who, a bit like me, a bit sort of consumerist in terms of adverts, the advert I always think about at this point is where you see lots of people that we would know in the media saying the name of a person. and you're invited into that advert to think about, well, what's going to happen at the end, what's the out product. And it's often, these were really important teachers in their lives. These were people who made a real difference to how they felt about themselves and the adults that they became. And it's so important. I can remember the teachers that made those differences to the way I felt about myself, and it was never anything very obvious. It was often something very, very incidental to what was happening in the general community of the school. So we all have to remember that spending more than half of your waking hours in the school means that as you're making these really important decisions, you will want to be thinking about the sorts of teachers that your children will be coming into contact with, the sort of community that's being created by the school that they're going to. And so the other thing that we really have noticed when particular issues come up for young people and we're asked to go in to do observations is we can often say something about the sort of behaviours that we're seeing from children in terms of how they're responding to the teacher. So we can do quite a bit of work in helping staff track those relationships when things might seem a little bit sort of spiky or not so smooth, and help them think about the relationships that children are coming from at home and how it might not be so easy for them to make those easy moves into feeling that they can feel that teachers are alongside them in the way that we want them to be. Another part of this is, again, I think another media word, which is resilience. Resilience is everywhere as a word at the moment. It's the thing that, I think we've all latched onto. We want our children to be resilient. That will mean that they're going to be fine, good, healthy young people. But resilience didn't come to any of us easily. It is something that we had to learn about and we had to develop. So we're all sitting here today. I know what resilience feels like to me. I know I have good days and I have not so good days, and I sort of know what to do when things don't feel so great. I can almost sort of self-repair and get myself to a point whereby I think, okay, I'm going to have to do this in order to feel that I can manage my day. And you have people around you at work who you can rely on who will also help you with that. But resilience in terms of definitions and the way in which we've started to define it at the Tavistock is that it's really about being able to cope with the challenges that life presents. So for most of us, that's something that we are having to do. And for some of us, as a daily experience of life. Feeling good enough. I think this is something that we've spent a lot of time focusing on, because actually, if you don't feel good enough about yourself, it's very hard then to have good relationships with other people. So we want to see and want to grow our children in a way that they actually feel good enough about themselves. There's enough inside them that makes them think that they are worth something, that they have something to contribute, and that people will be interested in them. So that's a really central part of this. Being able to bounce back from the problems that we face. And you'll see in your little packs that we've got a Weeble there, because that seems to me to be at the heart of how life can feel. That you can take the knocks and it does make you feel as if you almost fall sideways, but actually, as adults, we can sort of pick ourselves back up. But children can't always do that unless they've got us there to help them and put the sort of scaffolding around them, the emotional scaffolding around them, to say, next time you'll be able to maybe come at this in a particular way, or now you've learned that it feels like this, you'll know that feeling next time, so it won't be such a shock and it won't floor them in exactly the same way. Having a good relationship with yourself and with others, of course, is really essential. And again, I think that a lot of the young people that come into the clinic, or that we hear about, part of their sort of initial thought is that things on the outside aren't working for them. They haven't got friends, or they don't feel part of things. And what sometimes gets uncovered is that they don't feel that they've got a good enough relationship with themselves. They don't know themselves. They're not sure about what they might have to offer or what they might be able to contribute to, the relationships that they want to have. And of course, the last example that I'm just going to run through is, we all need to feel that we know where we're going. If you wake up in the morning, all of us, I'm sure, feel much better about the day if we've got an idea of what the day might entail for us, how it's going to pan out. And for a lot of children, and more we hear this, that is not something that they feel that secure about. So we're looking for schools, and we're encouraging you to look for schools where clarity and thoughtfulness and support are all things that they know they might encounter during the day and will make them feel that they can really manage these contexts. Because if you haven't got the ability to know where you're going, it's really hard to feel that your 2 feet are on the ground, and you can feel quite wobbly about that. So those are our sort of overarching thoughts about resilience and what we think children and young people need from you, their parents, and need from schools. We've got a word that we've put into the pack called containment, which is really, I think again, is about what we as professionals try and offer schools, children and their families, and what I think children are expecting and would like their parents to provide for them. So what we want you to be able to think about is how can you provide a space for your child where you really hear what they're saying and you can help them to put their thoughts and their feelings into words, so that there's an environment at home whereby you're really receptive to the way in which they're feeling. And I don't want anybody in the room to think that we're saying this as if this is easy. This isn't easy. This is complex stuff that we all need to be thinking about. Being a parent is an incredibly difficult task because it is absolutely engaging you in a myriad of ways that often can't be predicted. But being able to offer your child the experience of being understood, or at least the idea that you're trying to understand what it is they're bringing, is incredibly helpful. You just have to picture yourself being in a work setting or with a group of friends and you've got a particular issue, you're not quite sure how to talk about it, but you rely on the people around you to give you the space, particularly friends, to help you get to a point where you can express what's going on and you can really think, yeah, they got that. It might not have helped, but they understood what was going on for me and they were really ready and prepared to sort of step in and help me think about it. So being understood, particularly for us in a therapeutic setting, is at the heart of what we do. But actually, children and young people do come to us and they talk about their parents, they talk about teachers, and often particularly teachers who really get them, who've really understood something. And it's interesting where those teachers or the school staff come in the chain, because often they're not teachers, often it's the caretaker, or it's the dinner person, or it's the lunchtime duty person, who just gives them a look or a smile, or just touches them on the shoulder, somebody who just notices them. And I think I've been quite surprised that those being the moments that children communicate as being the most powerful moments in which they feel, yeah, somebody's really taking notice of me today. So feeling contained is absolutely part of what we want you to be thinking about and to be taking away today, but also thinking about what sort of containment, what sort of support the school might be providing for your child alongside your family support.
Okay. Thank you, Laverne. I just wanted to think for a minute about how we all know something about children and young people, adolescents. And one of the main ways we know is because we've been there ourselves. We've all been children and we've all been teenagers. But it's really hard sometimes to hold on to that and easy to lose sight of what it was like to be a child or a young person, because as adults we've got all sorts of other things that are going on for us, and you know, our work and our making money, worrying about jobs, things like that, and also, you know, being parents, which sort of take over from remembering what it's like to be a child, and we have all sorts of pressures on behalf of our children. We want them to do well, we want them to get into good schools and get lots of good exams and go on to have really interesting careers. So we've got all that in mind and we're trying to think about that, and sometimes it gets in the way of really remembering what it's like to feel small and to feel like nobody is noticing me, or I'm not sure what to do, or I feel really nervous, or other people seem to be having an easier time of this than me. Why am I struggling with this? And we lose sight of that a bit. So I wanted to say, let's for just 1 minute try and remember what it was like to be 8 and be at primary school, and what it was like to be 15 or 16. You know, who were you hanging out with when you were those ages? What were you doing? And how did you get on with your mum and dad? And, you know, what were they up to? Because I think one of the things we bring to this arena about choosing schools or about thinking about our children's education is, what did our parents do when they thought about us going to school? And everybody who's listening to this is going to have had really different experiences. And some people might be bringing, well, I think my parents did the wrong thing and I wasn't very happy at school and I wish something different had happened. And some people will be bringing, I had a great time at school and I think my parents got it spot on, and all sorts of things in between. But we bring those in a way where sometimes we're really aware of them and we think, I like that about school, I want that for my child about school because that's what I liked. But other times we're bringing things maybe that were more negative about our school experiences, and we're not really thinking about them because they were kind of painful for us as children to, you know, maybe be in a school that we didn't like very much, or not have friends at a particular time, or be bullied a bit. And we want our children to not have those experiences, those bad experiences. But sometimes we end up doing sometimes the same things that our parents did because it's what we know. And that's true of all sorts of things about parenting. We can all end up doing what our parents did, even if it was stuff we didn't really like when we were 10, because it's sort of what we know. And sometimes you have to stop and think about that to think, well, hold on, do I have to do it exactly the same as all those years ago, or can things be a bit different for my child? And also, is my child exactly the same as me, or as how I was when I was 12? Maybe not. You know, your children might be quite different personalities to you. So there's quite a lot about how we think about those things and how we let in hearing what our children think and feel. Because sometimes when you're very set on something, or you've got lots of worries about something, you actually don't really want to hear what your child feels about it, because maybe it's going to be a bit inconvenient actually, or a bit upsetting, because you want to do this, and if they say, but that's going to make me miserable, you might think, well, it'd be easier for me if I just carry on down my path and do it on the basis that I'm weighing up all these options. So there are lots of reasons why we don't always hear our children in the way that our children might like to be heard. And that's not about being bad parents or about not loving our children, because everybody here loves their children. You wouldn't be here having these, going around these stands and listening to these talks if you didn't love your children and want what's best for them. But sometimes we find it difficult to convey that to our children because we're very busy trying to get things right. And one of the things that children who come to see us at the Tavistock often feel is that their parents aren't listening to them very much, or aren't understanding things from their point of view. And that isn't because their parents don't want to, but it's hard as parents, I think, to weigh up all the different things. And I think one of the things that I also think is that it's harder for children to hear positive things than negative things. Children remember critical things very well, and they hang on to them. You know, children will tell you years later about that thing that person said 5 years ago that was, stuck with them, made them feel like not a nice person. Whereas you could be telling your child every day, I love you, and I think you're great, and I'm here for you. And they can still manage to forget that sometimes. So I think you can't overemphasize how much children want to hear, not necessarily that they're the best at everything, or to have you tell them sort of fake things, because it can be tempting to say, oh, that's brilliant, that's just the best piece of homework ever, when actually they didn't try very hard and it's not very good. But that isn't the kind of positive thing that children really need. Actually, what they need is, I'm here for you and I'm interested in what you have to say, even if it doesn't quite fit with what I want. But I'm interested in you and knowing about you, no matter what you do, even the things you do that aren't so nice, even when you're being mean to your little brother, or even when you've done something not very nice at school, I'm still interested in you. And that's really what Laverne was talking about when she was talking about attachment, that's so important about their relationships with you, because we all build our adult relationships on what we've experienced as children, and how we are at going out into the world and having intimate relationships, having friendships, getting on with our boss at work, is all on the template of what we experienced as children with our parents and then with our teachers and our friends at school. So that's why this is really important, this stuff, that you're coming, whatever your dilemmas are that have brought you here, that's why it's so important, because you're doing something that's going to prepare your children for the future in a really important way. So what do we know about children's development? We know that little children, in terms of the way their brains work, sort of 4 to 7 year olds, can't really think very rationally at all about anything. We know that once you get to about 7, between 7 and about 11, 12, children get really good at concrete thinking. They get really good at, acquiring facts and knowing about things and being very curious and asking lots of questions about how things work, but they're not very good at abstract thinking at that age. So they can't make really important decisions completely on their own because they can't get their heads around things that are a bit abstract or a bit in the future or that involve weighing up lots of different options and thinking through the consequences, because they're just not very good for that. Their brains aren't really built to do that yet. So that's why we have to help them a lot at that age, and that's why relationships at that age are really important, primarily with parents, because they're the ones that are sort of around most, but also with teachers. When children get to about 11 or 12, they start being able to think in a more abstract way, and their thinking gets a bit more adult in some ways, but that's also about the time that puberty kicks in a big way. So although in some ways they get a bit more adult in their thinking, they also get really overwhelmed by hormones and by adolescent stuff that's starting to kick in. That means that actually they're not always very rational. So they might be able to think in an abstract way about what's good or bad or the rights and wrongs of things, but in terms of their behaviour, they'll find themselves doing really silly things and things that as adults we look at and think, what? Why did you do that? That was just bound to go wrong. What's that about? But it will have made sense to them at that particular moment because they can't think very clearly. So what we know about teenage brains, which I think it's important as parents to hang on to, because teenagers can feel very hard work, very argumentative and difficult sometimes, very much wanting to do their own thing, and so there's a lot of developmental pulls for teenagers towards being independent, having their own views respected, being different often to their parents. If you remember yourself as a teenager, one of the things that teenagers do is to go, I don't want to be like them, I want to be my own person. But they also want to be exactly the same as the other teenagers that they're friendly with, which is why you get a lot of, I must have that Nike top because everyone's got one, and if I don't have one, then I'll just be completely in the wrong. And that might feel quite irrational, but they've got their very good reasons for doing those things that are to do with how teenage brains work. And teenage brains, when you look at them with sort of CAT scans or MRIs, they're quite different to grown-up brains, which people are sometimes surprised about, because I think people think, particularly sort of 14, 15-year-olds, they sort of should be thinking like grown-ups by now. But actually, the frontal bit of their brains, which is the bit that does all the sort of rational thinking, is quite a bit smaller than it will be by the time they're 18 to 21. So they haven't got everything that they need to think very rationally, but they're also flooded with hormones, really interested in thinking about sex and other people and attraction and mates and being with them and moving away from you and moving into a sort of different world. So they're quite complicated to deal with. And they do things that seem odd to us. They have big ups and downs that we can't really understand why they're suddenly so cross, sort of 0 to 60. They're just cross just like that. Or, they don't want to come to things that they used to like to come to in the family. You invite them on a nice family outing and they say, yeah, that's the last thing I'd want to do because I need to be with my friends. They change the way they look. They change their views every 5 minutes. They're kind of unpredictable. And what they're doing is getting ready to be adults, but they're sort of practicing lots of things. And you can help them with all those changes by building on the relationship that you made when they were much younger, on that good attachment and that listening space that Laverne was talking about, that space to be understood and to be able to say your emotions, and keeping those lines of communication open. The thing that I think we see most of all when we see adolescents who have got into difficulties is that they feel on their own. They feel that there isn't a mother or a father who they could talk to about their problems, and usually it's not because there isn't a concerned mum or dad, because there usually is, but the concerned mum or dad doesn't feel very available to them because they've decided that you're not listening, or that you don't understand, or that you're so busy setting rules, which is part of parenting a teenager, is having boundaries and rules, but that you're so busy doing that and saying, no, you can't do this, and no, that's not right, and don't do it like that, that actually they can't tell you that they may have made a mistake, or that they may be experimenting with drugs and alcohol and they'll think you'll disapprove, or they may be feeling differently about themselves and what sort of person they think they're going to grow up to be to how they think you think they should be. And so those lines of communication are really important, and letting them know that you're there for them, which sounds like I'm saying that's easy. It's not at all easy when someone's in your face shouting at you, or slamming their bedroom door and not wanting to take part in conversations. But I think what we would say is trying to calm things down, trying to talk to them when they're not in the middle of a sort of 0 to 60, I can't listen to anything you're saying, trying to pick your battles so that you're not telling them off about absolutely everything, dividing things into, these ones I can let go, this one's really important. If you're going to win one battle, it's got to be this one. And all these little ones you could afford to say, I just won't have that fight today because I need to concentrate on the one I've got to win. So those kind of advice that people talk about, it's remembering that your teenager feels quite small inside, even if they look really big on the outside, which can be really hard to do, especially if they're taller than you. I find it hard with my teenage son to not forget that he's quite little, because he's up there. I think I'm handing back to Laverne now.
Okay, gosh, I felt the impact of those words as you were saying them, having children myself, because I think it isn't easy. One might think that the work that we do makes it easier for us to think about, but actually our children are all very unpredictable and they're not the same. So they bring their communications about what they're struggling with in very different ways. One of the things that was sort of in our minds coming today was around parental expectations, actually, and school expectations, and the sort of muddle and mix that can occur between those two dynamics. Because of course, as parents, we want our children to do well, and schools, all of these schools here, will be wanting your children to do well within their school settings and to be getting very good grades. And therein lies the dilemma, because actually what a lot of young people present to us with is a real concern about what people are saying to them, about what's expected. So when things can start to unravel at school and school staff say, don't worry, you don't need to worry about getting all A stars, they absolutely know that that's not true, and that actually the school are saying that, but they're not meaning it. And it's a really complicated dynamic for them to find themselves in. We do quite a lot of work with schools to try and help them develop a much more honest and open way of speaking to young people when things aren't going so well. Because telling a young person in a very, very good school that you don't expect them to get 10 or 11 A stars doesn't cut it, And actually, young people see straight through it. So we're all having to find a way. We haven't got a solution to this, but we're all having to find a way to have a more honest conversation with our young children about our expectations, what we would like for them, but also needing to really notice what they can do, what they're capable of. And it takes quite a bit of power in you as a parent to put your wishes for them to one side and really notice when your child is letting you know that they're working as hard as they can, and the results they're going to get are the results that they're working towards and that they really can achieve. Because the breakdown that we see in young people, and you'll read it in the papers. I think I picked the Standard up last night, or one of the papers on the way home, and there's a young boy who's gone missing because he's just had enough. And I think, I sort of know what that might feel like. The amount of young people we encounter who really do feel like they've had enough of this pressure. They've had enough of not being able to have a very honest conversation about what they can actually do. They want their parents to see them for who they are and to be able to accept it. And for us as parents to be able to manage and tolerate our own disappointments around that. Because there is an ordinary thing around being disappointed if you feel you want your child to be doing something else and there's a real struggle to accept what they can bring to the table. So that's something that we really are wanting to be clear about today, and to be thinking with you about your own home context and what sort of climate you've got at home. Are you open to hearing about what your children are getting up to? Pretty tough, but young people report in our sessions, oh, I told my mum I did this at a party, or I told my dad I did this at a party. They want to try it out and test it out with you to see what you'll do with it. I'm seeing somebody at the moment who said to her mum, when I go to a party, I do have a little bit of smoke, and she's very interested in what her parent does with that. Really interested. She knows that her mum or dad are going to say, darling, I'd really rather you weren't doing that, but she wants them to know. And if you've got a child who's checking in with you in that way, you've got to be robust enough to be able to bear it. You've got to be able to manage it, because it's absolutely what you'd want them to be doing. I'm sure you'd want to know about it than not know about it. So that, just to sort of come to an end, because I want to give a bit of time for some questions, but learning how to respond to your children is really difficult. You're going to get some things right and you're going to get some things very, very wrong. But not micromanaging them, not trying to overmanage everything that they're doing is going to be key. Again, I think we've got to sort of keep hearing the echoes of what Sarah said, which is that we've always got to keep thinking about what it was like for us as young people, and the bits that our parents got right, and the bits that we would like them to have sort of managed in a slightly different way. What would we have wanted? You will fall into the traps of saying things that you don't want to hear yourself saying. Of course you will, it's inevitable, that's what happens in sort of human relationships. But trying not to micromanage is key. I think we're all in the midst of trying to work out what to do with technology. I think it's the unknown, and I think if we had some answers, we probably would be somewhere else making lots of money imparting that. But it is the new beast that none of us really know about. But it's the new beast because we're all learning as well, and we're all on our phones. We're all saying we've got to check our emails. We're all saying we've got to just check this text. We're all saying, oh, hang on, darling, let me just take this call. So we're in the midst of it as well. So it's not just our children that aren't managing it, it's us as well that are really having some problems around that. So there is a bit of you that's got to get close to it, but I think you've really got to look at what you're doing as well, because actually there's a lot of naming and shaming in the therapy space when parents come to us and say they're always on their phone, and the kid pipes up, yeah? And where's your phone at the meal table? So we have got to keep a bit of an eye on that. So within all of this, we can talk about some of the ordinary stuff, and I think we've got to remember that a lot of the encounters you'll be having with your children are fairly ordinary, but there will be times when you'll have moments when something feels a little bit more than that, when your children may be struggling with things to do with the way they think they look and eating, not eating well, having an eating disorder, children who are presenting with behaviours that you're not so sure about. So we've got some here, anxiety and depression, we hear a lot about that. And as parents, you really do have to try and keep a bit of a watching brief on that, because some of this will be ordinary and it will pass. But if you are getting very worried about it, schools are exactly the places that you need to go to first to see whether or not it's something that they're also seeing, because everybody has to keep a bit of an eye on these sorts of issues. And the sort of real test is to not rush in too quickly, because our own mental health can fluctuate, and if our friends and colleagues were rushing in the minute they thought we were looking a bit low, we probably wouldn't thank them for it. We'd want them to wait and see whether or not actually it was something that was going to pass in our sort of ordinary life. So the message is keep watching them, make sure that you've got people around them also helping you to fill in the gaps where you think you might not know things. And if you get very worried, go to the GP, and hopefully you will be able to be referred to people like us, where we can invite you in as families to really think about what's going on. So there's an orderliness that we want to keep on the table, but we don't want to ignore the fact that there are times when things will sort of feel a bit more of a peak, and it may need a different level of thinking about. But actually, the support, the regular support that you provide for your children, the noticing, the listening, the keeping an eye on the relationship that you have with them, whilst also harking back to the sorts of relationships that you value, will be the key to making sure that your young people do grow up into successful adults.